It's time for us to check back in with the 9 brides and Granny Hite and see what happens next. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. A Son Returns. Lark Beckett, Corey's mother, was famous for her sweet jars that kept summer in her house throughout the year. It was her notion that the brides and soon brides should join in making friendship jars that would fill the new homes with perfume, reminding of this bright spring forever. So to the Beckett house, Levacy Vasey brought half a bushel of geranium leaves charged with smell of apple, rose, nutmeg, and lemon. Laurel Tidnanny brought lavender flowers with well-opened spikes. Kedron Hardy dumped down a bundle of sorrel and hay-scented ferns. Ellie Beckett Lee fetched a big poke of wild crabapple blooms from Old Dad Knob. Travis Swisher lugged vanilla-scented elderflowers. Silvermoon Annabelle brought a tow sack full of honey-like pennycress and violets gathered under the moist-rooted hemlocks. Anna and Esther Podlaski bore quarts of sweetbriar petals. Corey Beckett produced a peck of clove-like sweet williams and 3 of pink and scarlet roses. A newcomer to the district, discovered at the store and led to the gathering by Ellie, was Cynthia Trevitt. She seemed taken aback by the merriment, and her hands were empty. "You shall pick verbena from my garden," invited Aunt Lark. "These other things have been cured in the sun, but verbena doesn't need drying. It can go right in." Under Lark's guidance, the petals and leaves were layered with salt and jammed tight into stone crocks. Next time, we'll mix them with mace, cinnamon, sweet gum, and cedar shavings and let them stand some more. Remember, Cynthia, 1 friendship jar is for you. Unbelief and dawning belief chased across the newcomer's strained face. A rap and the front door opened on the babble. "May I come in?" Corey sprang up with a chirp of joy. The others cried, "Dr. Peeler!" The brave young man said, "Any tongues want to stay still long enough to be looked at? Any pulses want to be taken?" "Caddy Peeler," chorused the girls, "we've been laying for you." Corey won't talk. "Smart girl. Doctor's orders. Doctor's secrets." "But she's heard ours." Grinning, he backed out. Corey followed him. The door closed on the pair. The girls looked at each other, balked. After a few moments, Corey quietly returned. The doctor could be seen through the window, riding on to his office at Toller's store. A springtime before, the young man had come riding for the hollow and had reined up in a notch of the mountain and looked down. Ridge after ridge fell away before him. Beyond a deep blue-green veil, bench and ridge climbed again. Skies had always been narrow in that limestone scoop down there. Though not much of a horseman, he'd set to the descent. The scene grew familiar. This, after some miles, was the Cornet place. Dogs barked, a whale rope still swayed. People had been about, but at the sight of him, they'd vanished. Shy and unsure as ever toward intruders were the mountain folk, a habit learned from the wild things. In his boyhood, there had been bad blood between Cornets and Peelers, and he was a Peeler. He let the weathered door stay unthumped. At the bottom of the long jog, he came to Cat Track Run. He forded through springtime floodwater, around boulders, and under feathery green latticing. This, he spotted, was the Beckett place. Peelers and Becketts had been friendly. He swung down, tied the rented nag, and passed under rose bays and flowering quinces to the axe-driven, clapboard house. The front door stood open, but no one heeded his knock. He sauntered to the side porch. A bed was under a Bankskia rose trellis. Its white sheets lay open. Was this a house of sickness? Then he saw. She had tumbled from a homemade wheelchair, which lay capsized. She was on her hands, trying to draw up one knee. He ran and gathered her up. She was about 18. Her dark hair was all about her shoulders. She was in nightgown and wrapper, and light in his arms. Her dark eyes showed bewilderment at this pounce of a stranger. He kicked the chair back on its wheels and put her in it. "You're not hurt?" "Oh no, it happens." "Which Beckett are you?" "I'm Corey. Corey Beckett." She had been a skippity dancy mite of about 4 when he'd went away. "When did this trouble hit you?" 5 years and 4 months ago." No self-pity, simple matter-of-factness. "Anybody else at home?" "Not now. Ma's at Aunt Effie Tidnanny's." She was trying to figure him out, seeing he presumed a tall young man, serious and inclined to be gentle, soft-handed, indoorish pale, out of place in this rugged trough in the wilderness. He pressed, "And Ellie?" There'd been a sister to Corey, a year older. "She's married to John Lee." "I'm Caddy Peeler, Dr. Peeler." He grinned. He'd worked for the handle. Always he'd dreamed of dropping in on the hollow like this and casually mentioning his immense achievement. "Peeler? But they all moved away." "That's right. The whole family moved west but me. I lit out sooner and turned east. If your spill didn't knock you about too much, I'll clop along." It didn't matter. Thoughtfully he rode onward. A Saturday row of whittlers were on the porch of Toller's Mountain store. Their jaws and knives went still when he swung down. He scanned the row for faces he knew. Time had moved on. Uncle Tate Trevitt, who used to be shaped like a tough, curved scythe handle, now was scrunched to a sickle. Uncle Gid Lee was as bare on top as Trapper Bald. Tuckaleech Annabelle looked 60 pounds heavier. The newcomer saluted the row. Their response was guarded. Odors inside the store were still of calico and coffee, duckins and horse collars, cloves and molasses. Amos Toller had swapped pepper gray whiskers for flour white in the 14 years. Amos rested elbows on his scarred counter and trained brass-rimmed spectacles on the collar. "So you're the Peeler boy. Your folks was kind of do-less around here." "Mix malnutrition, pelegria, moonshine, and dysentery in equal parts, Mr. Toller, and that's what you get. I remember you, always patching or splinting boy or dog that was bunged up. I'm company doctor now at the Big Piney Lumber Mills. How long you stopping with us?" "Well, till tomorrow. I thought maybe you or somebody would put me up for the night. I want to visit old scenes and loaf a bit." "Loaf? Like Toppet? You'll go see Granny Hite. She's sprang in the knees and her legs is swole." "Granny Hite? I'll look in on her at once." "Like Toppet? Grandsir Beckett swallered a chunk of goat meat that sets crosswise in his gully and he bellers like a broke-tailed bull. He lives alone, half a mile above Yawkey's grist mill." "Old Grandsir? I'll dash there immediately." "Like Toppet? Heber Hardy's drove a rust nail in his foot and he's skeered he'll take lockjaw. When the day comes Heber has to shut off swearing, he'll bust his hoops." The storekeeper had more local ailments, but the man on holiday was gone. He didn't get back to the store that weekend, but on his way out he did see Mrs. Beckett. He stopped at the house with the Rosebays and the Banksias for that purpose. Corey must have said something. Bright-eyed, Mrs. Beckett looked at him long. "You were only a weed of a boy, Caddy Peeler. You went away driving 2 squilly pigs." "Yes, Aunt Lark. On that capital I set out after some schooling." Lark Beckett was a tiny, sweet-faced woman with a store of native insight and forthrightness. "Your ma was a lash-tongue and your pa a tip-jug. But you always did have get-up and spunk. Caddy Peeler, can you make Corey well?" He was startled. Cat Track Hollow and the Big Piney Mills were ranges apart. His days were seldom his own. "Can you?" "Aunt Lark, the right treatment can surely make her better. We need a doctor in this holler so badly, but we're all plain living people and can't pay much." Money wouldn't be the inducement. He had been born here. He had swum and noodled for catfish in the run. He'd hunted bees on Peckerwood Mountain and learned his numbers 3 or 4 weeks a year in Peckerwood School. Corey looked at him too, with eyes dark and questioning. "Ain't Lark," promised Caddy. "If you and others wish it, I'll ride over when I can." He knew what he was undertaking. Word of a doctor once or twice a month ran the length of the hollow like leaves before a wind. Amos Toller had a small room with a door to the store porch. He cleared it of boxes and barrels and turned it over to Caddy. Up the forest paths and down from the heights came people with their torments, but they were an obstinate lot. Aunt Joyce McLeese wore a lump on her neck that Caddy remembered from boyhood, but she never had crossed the mountains and wouldn't do it now for surgery. Caddy fetched in iodine salts. Granny Hite showed fine progress from the elastic stockings he brought her, but she almost boxed his ears when he suggested less trotting about on errands of neighborliness and mercy. Grandsir Beckett had been relieved of his chunk of goat gristle, but still had his rheumity. "My advice, Grandsir, is less terrapin hunting. Keep out of the swamps, and maybe you'll lose those tweaks and live to be 90. 90? I'm 94 already, and a diamondback stew's worth some twinches." Tatum Trevitt, a cave-bellied old gallus, sidled into the bare little dispensary. "I hear you're a doc." "Trying to be, Uncle Tate." "Well, I've got the trots. Started 2 months ago and ain't let up, by Jiminy. Shooting pains in the joints, ankles that big, mouth tastes like the bottom of a woodchuck nest." Caddy scanned the swollen eyelids. "What pork are you eating, Uncle Tate?" "Razorback. Smoked him myself." "Bring me a piece of this pork at once." Thin-chested Philaria Vasey came in, herding some of her 15 children. The youngest was in her arms. "I don't rightly know what's the matter with Omar, doctor. He screams at night like my man with the horrors. His little head sweats and his skull ain't closing." Caddy took the child. "You don't nurse him, Aunt Philura?" "Never was a worth a shuck at it for any of 'em. We've rickets here and maybe something else. I'll make a few tests, and later I want to look at your cow." Mrs. Cornett came in, once a fine figure of a woman. She was frail and bent. "Doctor, I want you should drap in on my godlove. He just sets." "More than formerly, ain't you, Leela?" "It used to be when there was sang to dig. Now it's all the time. What's more, the settings around's took Augie, Ono, Debbie, Eliezer, and Vernice. How's the shoe supply at your house, ain't you, Leela?" "We've 4 pair, counting 2 with holes a squirrel could walk through." "For 8 people? Your lazy ones have ground itch? It began with blisters on the feet?" "Yep, then it reached the arms, busted out orful. Now it's kindly like a crust." "Mrs. Cornett, this magnesium sulfate is to go into everybody at night, and in morning, about milking time, these capsules. 2 hours later, more of the sulfate. In addition, I prescribe a deep pit privy and shoes for all right away." Gideon Lee was brought to the consulting room, pushed by his woman. Uncle Gid had once been a hickory tree for strength, and he still ducked door tops. Marilla demanded, "Doctor, tell me why my man won't hoe or chop." "I tell her it's the bullet in me," pleaded Gil. "In my back. Been there 8 year." "Up with your shirt, Uncle Gid. We'll have a look." Caddy ran his hands over the elderly but vigorous muscles, feeling nothing. "You're sure it's there?" "Touch it every day. Marilla won't believe me." Caddy decided to try shock methods. He laid out with a showy flourish, hemostatic forceps, amputation knife, retractors for holding a wound open, and an 8-inch saw. Gid's eyes bugged. "What's them things?" "Surgeon's tools." He produced a 5-foot rubber tube with a bulb. "We'll clean out your stomach first. Swallow this end, Uncle Gid. Marilla, see if O Party and some other big fellers are handy out there. Your man may need holding." "I ain't a-goin' to swaller that," shouted Gideon. "Fact is, I ain't noticed the bullet lately. Maybe it's dissolved." "Could be, Uncle Gid." Caddy felt around again. "It would have been a joke on both of us if I'd opened you up and found it gone." Ha ha, joined Gideon, but not mirthfully. He tucked his shirt in. Now, Gid, said Caddy, you march straight home and lend Marilla the help she needs. Does the yard need cleaning up, ain't Marilla? It pure do, said Marilla grimly. Felton Annabelle, an unshaved youth with an axeman's shoulder, slid into the little dispensary. Caddy viewed his hulking form inquiringly. Don't tell me you have anemia or insomnia. Doc, can you go look in on a cabin tomorrow? What cabin? Why? Case of gunshot. Good heavens, why don't I go now? It hasn't took place yet, but it's going to. Cole Trevitt's up and married the girl I wanted, Vonnie Peters. Caddy pinned the youth with a stern eye. I don't ride these hills in order to aid planned murder. Good grab, dog. I'm only going to aim for Cole's legs. Do you want him to bleed to death? It took some direct language to convince Felt that such a shooting affray would result in a report to the sheriff. Felt Annabelle left, gloomy and wrathful. There, perceived Caddy, goes one who'll bear me plenty of ill will. Already there were others. So we'll stop right there. We'll have to tune back in next week to see what happens with Dr. Peeler and Corey and see what happens. We've already been given the indication she does get better, because at the beginning of this chapter she was the one that, got up and went outside with him and was walking around. So that's something for us to look forward to here. And if you'll remember, Corey was the girl with the book in the story about the book. So she had the big wish book, and she poured through it and got everybody to come to help her try to decide what she was going to get, because her sister Ellie had sold her a little carving and got the extra money. And then, of course, Corey surprised them by, instead of buying all the stuff for herself, she bought everything they wanted and give it to them. So we'll be looking forward to seeing how she starts to walk and how he's able to help her on that part, and then how they get together. I love the beginning of this chapter where it talks about them gathering all the flowers that they've dried, and you can just imagine them all summer long gathering those from the spring on through the summer, and then they're all going to meet there, and they're going to make the wonderful things that smell good so they can keep summer in their house all year long. I really love that. And again, like the Granny Hite helping them all make the quilts, and they're all excited about that. This is just another thing that's going to be really wonderful for all those brides when they have the house of their own, or the ones that are already brides when they get to take it back to their house. So I really, really love that. When Caddy Peeler there, when he was coming back after all the years of being gone, and he rides down the mountains, and the first house he comes to, he remembers that that's a family that didn't like his family, and he notices, like, you can just see it, the well rope is still kind of swinging, and you can just tell everybody's just disappeared, but they were just right there till they heard him coming. And he says that's normal, that's the nature of mountain folks. That is, I would even say today that that's still the nature of mountain folks. Maybe not all of them, but quite a bit of them, is that they are reticent to talk to strangers. They like to stay to themselves or to those that they know. Now, once they talk to strangers, they're nice and open and all that usually, but there is an unwillingness to talk to those that you don't know, to those that are strangers. Now, it might be strangers, from somewhere else that's you run into that are visiting from afar off, but it might just be strangers you don't know even in your own area. One of the first things you'll often hear, even today, if I go somewhere, maybe a community thing or a church, or we're singing somewhere, and they'll say, "Where are you from?" And then they'll say, "Who's your people?" So it's like Appalachians have this giant family tree in their head, and they're already trying to figure out if they know you and if you're okay and who you connect and how you connect. It's really a beautiful thing. But a lot of times in the situation like Doc Peeler there was describing, where they just disappeared, you'll hear that called being backward. People are backward. I've often been backward in my life. Now, some people think that means, like, if you say somebody's backward, it's like they're not as smart, there's something wrong with them. But in my lifetime, I've only heard that used to mean like shy, or doesn't really want to go out in public, you know, just like that. Like I was backward when I was a girl, and I would hide behind Granny or Pap if someone tried to talk to me, even at church or somewhere like that, and I was just too shy to speak. I would just hide behind them, you know. Anyway, so I liked the description of that. Now there was two words that was used in this chapter that I was not familiar with, not even not in a way of like it's common to hear them in Appalachia, but not even, I've never heard them at all that I knew of. And if they just used them once, I probably would have just, the author had, I just went on and just thought, well, I don't know what that means, but whatever. But since it was used, both of them was used more than once, I thought, well, I want to know what that means, what they're talking about. So it was Tophet, T-O-P-H-E-T was the first one. And that's when Doc first gets there back to the store, and he goes inside and he's talking to the toller there at the store, the person that owns the store, and he starts telling him about all these, when he says he's going to loaf around, and he says, top it, and he starts telling him about all these different ailments. People, you know, Granny Hite's sick, Grandsir's sick, he's got something hung in his throat and all this. And I thought, well, what in the world does that mean? As I kept thinking, is he trying to say something else? It's like a corruption of a word. But finally, of course, I Googled to see. So that's a biblical name out of the Bible. And it's one thing it's often used to represent. It's an actual place, and you can do research. You can do your own Google and read about it. But it's sometimes used in place of the word hell. So if you think about him saying they top it, then if he might have said they hell, you're going to loaf. You're going to go talk to Grandsir, or I'm going to go help Grandsir, or go check on Granny Hite's legs and her feet. They're all swole up. So that was interesting. I learned that. So maybe in some other part of Appalachia that was commonly used in place of the word hell. I'm not sure. And then the other one was Banksia, Bank, B-A-N-K, and then S-I-A. And that was at Aunt Lark's house, at Corey's house, where he was talking about the flowers. So I Googled that one, and that does mean flower and plants. It was flower and plants. I've never heard either one of those words in my area of Appalachia, and I've never even read them in a book, in another book either. So I'm kind of curious about those two. You tell me if you're familiar with them. If you've noticed them in any kind of, in your area, if you ever heard them, but also if you've ever noticed them in any writings about Appalachia or anything like that. So those were two new words I learned. Now, talking about Aunt Lark, she sounds like a lovely lady. Of course, we've heard about her in some of the other chapters, especially the one about Corey with the Wish Book. But she didn't waste any time in telling Doc Peeler. I loved it. She said, your mother was a lash tongue, or his ma, she said, was a lash tongue, and your pa was a tip jug. So she didn't have any use for them, but what a colorful way to describe them. Very colorful. Toller at the store didn't have any good thing to say about them either. So, and they were the ones that had left town. And of course, they're the ones that had told, I think they're the ones, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were the ones that had told Tuckaleach about how wonderful it was out west and that he should come out there. And then sweet too that Aunt Lark, she said that, you know that all these, when he was going around and helping Granny Hite and helping Grandsir and helping all the other people he helped that first weekend that he come, you know that just went through like wildfire. The gossip did, like wildfire. That they were saying, hey, do you remember that Peeler boy? He's come back and he's a doctor and he helped get that meat out of Grandsir's throat and he's okay now, and he helped Granny Hite and her legs. So you know that had just been going through the holler there. Everybody had been talking about it. So you can definitely see why Aunt Lark, she just cut right to the chase. Can you help Corey? Can you get her out of this wheelchair? Can you help her walk again? So you can just imagine that, her hearing it and begin to wonder if he could help Corey. And then of course Corey could say, well, he already helped me back into my chair. He come by and help me then, so maybe he could help me. And then I love the part when he is talking to Grandsir and kind of telling him your rheumatism, it calls it rheumatism, would be better if you'd stay out of the swamps, and you might even live to be 90. And then Grandsir says, I'm 94. I've already lived past that. So I thought that was really funny. And then he was saying getting the terrapins for the stew was worth a little twitches here and there because it was so tasty. So I liked that part. This, again, we got to see what happens next week, but I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me what you liked about this part, and especially those two words, Toppet and Banksia. I may be saying them both wrong, but tell me if you're familiar with them and whatever else you liked in this part of the book. And as always, please drop back by next Friday, because now we got to see what happens. We've got to see how Doc Peeler and Corey get together.